Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also, share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. Kate Reynolds turned the key in the lock, and the door opened with the familiar creak that made her teeth ache every time. The bag slid off my shoulder, thumping loudly on the wooden floor in the hallway. The smell of yesterday's pasta hung in the air. The container remained on the kitchen table because Kate decided yesterday that she would clean up tomorrow. Tomorrow came, and the container was still there. She glanced at the blinking light bulb in the hallway. She had been meaning to replace it for 2 weeks, but hadn't gotten around to it. Kate kicked the edge of the rug, which was always riding up, with her boot and walked inside. She was 37, but she did not look at herself in the mirror by the door. Dark hair pulled into a messy bun, stray strands at her temple, a coat with frayed elbows. All this was just the background of her life. She took off her coat, hung it on the hook, and her fingers froze for a second as if they wanted to remember something. Maybe the day she bought that coat on sale and laughed with Mike in an office detective way. There was nothing to laugh about now. The kitchen greeted her with the hum of the lamps, which turned on with a slight click. The cold light snatched from the darkness an old table with scratches, a sink with a lonely mug, and that very container with pasta. Kate opened the refrigerator and stared at its contents. 3 yogurts, 1 apple, a piece of cheese that she had taken on sale and now didn't know what to do with. The refrigerator hummed louder, as if reproaching her for her indecisiveness. She slammed the door and took her phone out of the back pocket of her jeans. The screen was blank. No calls, no messages. Mike, her husband, was somewhere on the highway, maybe Iowa, maybe Missouri. She didn't ask, and he didn't tell. Their last conversation was 3 days ago, and all she remembered was his tired, well, bye at the end. Kate put the kettle on, which immediately hissed like an old cat. While the water was heating up, she scrolled through her phone. News, social networks, work chat. There was a message from Liz, her colleague who always found an excuse to write after work. "Did you see that they messed up the vacation schedule again? I'm shocked," Liz wrote. Kate chuckled, imagining Liz sitting on her couch with a glass of wine and being dramatic. She typed, "Yes, it's a mess. We'll sort it out tomorrow." Liz responded instantly, "Are you even at home, or are you buried in reports again?" Kate looked at the kitchen, at the kettle, which was already puffing, at the container of pasta that she had not put away. "At home, relaxing," she wrote, adding a cocktail emoji, although she only drank chamomile tea, and even that with difficulty. "She's resting," came the answer immediately. "Listen, have you seen the new guy from it? They say it's nothing like that. Young, but handsome." Kate rolled her eyes, but the corners of her lips twitched. Liz was incorrigible. "Liz, I'm 37. I don't go after it, people," she shot back. But in vain. "Live, Kate, live." Liz added a bunch of emoticons: dancing woman, fire, hearts. Kate shook her head and put her phone down. The kettle clicked, and she brewed chamomile tea that smelled like wet grass. She bought it because the box said calming, and she seemed to need something calming for a long time. The first sip confirmed, the taste is disgusting. But she still drank, because it was not in her rules to quit what she started. Kate sat down at the table and ran her finger over one of the scratches, a mark from the time Mike tried to fillet frozen fish right on the table. Then they had a fight, not because of the table, but because he left for 2 weeks without even warning. "You know how it works," he said then, and Kate fell silent because there was no point in arguing. This was 4 years ago, or 5. Time dragged on like dried glue. She stood up and turned off the overhead light, leaving only the lamp above the stove. Its soft yellow light made the kitchen a little more alive. Kate took the mug and walked into the living room. The sofa was dented with a coffee stain that she never removed. She sat down and covered herself with a blanket, a gift from Mike's mother, which was too scratchy, but it was a pity to throw it away. There was a laptop on the coffee table and Kate opened it. A still from the series froze on the screen, some detective in a rainy town. She turned on the episode, but after 10 minutes she realized that she did not understand who killed whom and why. Her thoughts were confused. She remembered that she needed to buy milk, then she thought about a meeting with the dean, then she imagined Mike in some roadside diner, where he eats French fries and watches basketball. "What's wrong with me?" she muttered, closing the laptop. The silence in the house was thick, except for the clock on the wall ticking like a metronome. Kate hated this clock, the old one with the pendulum, inherited from Mike's grandmother. He insisted that they be hung, saying that they were family heirlooms. Kate didn't mind. She rarely objected at all. The phone vibrated and she reached for it, hoping it was Mike. But it was Liz. "Seriously, Kate, go have coffee with that guy tomorrow. At least you'll have some fun." "Oh my God, Liz," Kate laughed out loud, but the laugh came out somehow ragged. She wrote, "Go to bed, gossip girl. I'm a gossip and you're boring. Good night." Liz ended the message with a heart. Kate put the phone down and finished her tea, which became even worse as it got cold. She stood up, put the mug in the sink, and looked at the pasta container. Tomorrow, she thought, knowing that tomorrow he would most likely remain standing. She went up to the bedroom. The bed was unmade. Its side was a wad of sheets. Mike's side was perfectly flat, like in a hotel. Kate changed into an old t-shirt that said Bloomington 5K. She ran that race about 7 years ago and hasn't run since. She lay down without turning on the light and stared at the ceiling. A car passed outside the window, then another. The city fell silent, and Kate still lay there and thought why this evening was the same as all the others. "We have to do something," she said quietly, but then fell silent because she didn't know what exactly. She turned on her side, pulled up the blanket, and remembered how she and Mike once sat on the lake. He talked about his first car, and she laughed because he described her as the girl he loved. Then he looked at her with such warmth that it seemed to her that they would forever remain like this young, light, alive. Kate closed her eyes, trying to hold on to the memory, but it slipped away like smoke. She didn't know if she would call Mike tomorrow. Maybe he'll ask how you're doing, or just write hello, or maybe he won't write anything. She was scared because she didn't know what she wanted. Kate pushed open the glass door to the office wing of the college, and the air-conditioned air hit her face, replacing the morning stuffiness of Bloomington. Her heels clicked on the linoleum as she made her way through the maze of cubes to her desk. The bag was weighing down her shoulder, and in her hand was swinging a thermal mug with coffee, which she had bought on the way because she had run out of homemade coffee. It was an ordinary morning, a traffic jam at the entrance to campus, a radio where the host was laughing too loudly at his jokes, and a vague feeling that she had forgotten something important. Maybe respond to the dean's letter, or buy milk. She plopped down in a chair, turned on the computer, and stared at the screen as it loaded with a slight whir. The office was quiet, except for the hum of the printer somewhere in the distance, and Liz, her colleague, tapped on the keyboard, humming something under her breath. Kate opened her email, 23 new emails, half of them automatic notifications about security training that no one had read. She sighed and took a sip of coffee. It was already a little warm and more bitter than usual. "Kate, did you see this?" Liz leaned out from behind the partition, waving a printout. Her red hair was pulled back into a high ponytail that bounced when she spoke. "New vacation schedule. They got it all mixed up again. I should be on vacation in July, not August." Kate turned, placing her mug on the table. "Seriously? Again?" She reached out, took the piece of paper, and ran her eyes over the table. "Well, of course, I'm not on the list at all. I told you, it's a mess." Liz rolled her eyes and plopped back into her chair. "We need to go to Marge. She'll sort it out." "Or it won't," Kate muttered, returning to the screen. Marge, their boss, was a master at promising to get it right and then forgetting about it for a month. Kate began sorting letters when the door at the far end of the office opened and a guy she hadn't seen before walked in. Tall, thin, wearing jeans and a plaid shirt with rolled-up sleeves. There was a bag with a laptop hanging on his shoulder, and he was holding a plastic cup of coffee in his hand. He stopped, looking around as if looking for someone, and Kate found herself looking at him a little longer than necessary. She quickly looked away, staring at the monitor. "It's probably that new one from it," Liz whispered, leaning out from behind the partition again. Her eyes sparkled like those of a child who has found candy. "I heard he was hired for a server project. Temporary, but cute." "Liz, you're incorrigible." Kate shook her head, but the corners of her lips twitched. "I don't have time to look at the new ones. I have 23 letters and a vacation schedule where I don't exist." "Well, that doesn't mean you can't take a look." Liz giggled and disappeared behind the partition. Kate returned to work, but half an hour later she was called into the conference room for a meeting about the project. She grabbed a notebook, a pen, and a mug, which was already empty, and hurried down the corridor. Several people were already sitting in the hall. Marge, 2 employees from finance, and that same guy from it. He sat in the corner with his laptop on his lap and typed something without looking up. "Kate, great, you're here." Marge waved her hand, pointing to the chair next to her. "This is Jake, our Newit specialist. Jake, this is Keith Reynolds, our HR genius." Jake raised his head and smiled not tightly, but somehow easily, as if they already knew each other. "Hello, nice to meet you." Mutually, Kate nodded, sitting down. Her voice sounded a little more formal than she intended, but she immediately buried her head in her notebook to hide the awkwardness. The meeting dragged on for a painfully long time. Marge was explaining something about updating the servers, the finance guys were arguing about the budget, and Kate was taking notes, although half the terms flew by. Jake spoke little, but when asked, he answered clearly, with a slight irony that made Kate smile furtively. For example, when Marge asked how long the data transfer would take, he said, "Well, unless the servers decide to go on strike, about 2 weeks." Marge laughed, and Kate found herself thinking that it was unexpectedly funny. After the meeting, Kate headed to the coffee machine in the break room. She inserted a coin, pressed a button, and the machine hummed, dispensing something that smelled more like plastic than coffee. Kate winced at the brown liquid in the paper cup. "Is this always the coffee here?" A voice came from behind. Kate turned around and Jake was standing at the door, holding his plastic cup, which was apparently empty. "It's worse than it seems," she replied, taking a careful sip and immediately regretting it. "But after a couple of months, you get used to it. Or you give up and buy it at the coffee shop across the street." Sounds like a plan." Jake came closer, threw his glass into the trash, and crossed his arms. "Although I thought the college must have some secret supply of good coffee for employees. You know, like a reward for surviving such meetings." Kate chuckled. "If there are, Marge is hiding them in her office. And we, mere mortals, drink this." She raised her glass as if toasting. Jake laughed, quietly but sincerely. "Okay, I'll remember. Don't trust the machines here. Do you sit here often? In the restroom?" Kate shrugged. "Sometimes. When you need to hide from letters or from Liz, who wants to discuss who is exchanging glances with whom in the office." "Oh, so there's gossip here too." His eyebrows raised and his voice became playfully interested. "I thought it was just a boring college." "Oh no, there's a whole series here." Kate grinned, surprised at how easy it was to answer her. "Liz is the main director. Today she has already decided that you are the cute new guy." Jake pressed his hand to his chest, pretending to be flattered. "Seriously? And I haven't even had time to do anything yet. What is my rating?" Kate pretended to think. "So far, a solid 7 out of 10. But if you bring normal coffee, you can go up to 8. "Deal," he nodded, and his smile became a little wider. "Just tell me where the nearest coffee shop is. Otherwise, I've only been in Bloomington for a week and only know the gas station and my motel." "Motel?" Kate looked at him, trying not to show curiosity. "Are you living right in the spirit of a road movie?" "Yeah," he shrugged. "Well, temporarily. My contract is for 3 months, so I haven't unpacked my bags yet. The motel is normal, Only the neighbor upstairs dances every evening. I think he does step dance. Kate laughed at the thought. Sorry, but there is a coffee shop on the corner, Bean and Brew. At least the coffee there doesn't smell like plastic. I wrote it down. Jake patted his pocket as if there was a notepad there. Are you local? Or did you also come to Bloomington for adventure? Local. Kate took another sip of coffee, which was already quite cold. I was born here, studied here, worked here. Sometimes it feels like I'm just walking in circles. He nodded, looking at her a little more carefully. What are you doing to break out of the circle? Kate hesitated. The question was simple, but she suddenly realized that she did not know the answer. Well, I watch TV series. I go to the supermarket. Sometimes I think that I should sign up for yoga, but I don't get any further. Yoga, you mean? Jake smiled. I tried it once. Fell on the mat after 5 minutes. The instructor said I had a unique approach to balance. Kate laughed again, and somehow she felt better. She didn't notice how several minutes passed while they chatted about nonsense, about how Jake once broke the office printer while trying to fix it, about how Kate once got stuck in the campus elevator for half an hour and was almost late for a meeting. The conversation was light, about nothing, but Kate suddenly caught herself thinking that she didn't want it to end. Okay, I have to go. Jake looked at his watch. We need to deal with this server before he starts a riot. But it was cool to chat. Yes, Kate nodded, feeling slightly awkward. Good luck with the server. Thank you. And hey, if you find that secret coffee at Marge's, let me know. He winked and left the room. Kate remained at the machine, looking at her cup. The coffee was disgusting, but for some reason she smiled. She threw the glass in the trash and returned to her desk. Liz immediately leaned out from behind the partition. Well, she whispered, have you seen him? Did you talk to him? Liz, you're unbearable. Kate shook her head, but couldn't help but smile. Yes, I did. He's normal. Normal? Liz snorted. Kate, you are hopeless. Tell me everything. Nothing to tell. Kate opened the mail, but her thoughts were still somewhere in the relaxation room, in this stupid conversation about coffee and yoga. She didn't know if she would see Jake tomorrow, but for some reason she hoped that she would. Kate sat at her desk, staring at a spreadsheet of new hires. The monitor screen was flickering slightly, and for the second time that morning she thought that she should ask it to replace it. The office was stuffy, despite the air conditioner humming somewhere near the ceiling. Liz, sitting behind the partition, typed something as fast as if she was participating in a competition. Kate reached for the thermal mug, but the coffee had long cooled down, and she only winced as she put it back. The morning dragged on slowly. She'd already answered half the emails, sent a query to Marge about her vacation schedule, and even managed to exchange a few words with Jake when he stopped by the office to pick up the cable for the server. He joked about coffee from the machine, and Kate found herself smiling a little wider than necessary. But now he was gone, Liz was busy, and Kate was left alone with the tables and a slight irritation that she couldn't explain. The phone vibrated on the table, and Kate jumped. A name appeared on the screen, Mike. She froze, looking at him, as if the call was something unexpected, even though he called a couple of times a week when he could. Her fingers hesitated for a second, but she still answered, raising the phone to her ear. Hello, her voice was even, almost neutral. Hi, Mike responded. His voice was hoarse, with a slight background. It seemed that he was in the cab of a truck, and somewhere in the distance the engine was humming. How are you? Kate looked at the computer screen, at the half-finished letter she had started an hour ago. Fine. Job. And you? Yes, too, he coughed, and she heard him change gear. Just loaded up in Columbus. I'm going to Indianapolis. Oh, Kate nodded, although he couldn't see her. She didn't know what to say. Columbus, Indianapolis, these names told her nothing, except that he was somewhere far away again. How is the road there? Fine. The weather is rubbish, it rains all day, but it's bearable. He fell silent, and Kate heard him take a sip, probably from his old thermos, which she gave him about 5 years ago. Listen, I was thinking, I might be able to come over for the weekend. Kate froze, her fingers gripping the phone a little tighter. She felt a faint spark of hope stir in her chest, but immediately suppressed it. She had heard this before, maybe, I'll try, if everything works out. Seriously, she asked, trying not to let her voice betray any expectation or doubt. Yeah, Mike coughed again. My flight ends on Friday, and if there are no new orders, I will be at home. By Saturday for sure. By Saturday, Kate repeated, looking at the calendar on the table. Today was Tuesday. She ran her finger along the edge of the notepad where she had scribbled a reminder to meet with the dean. That would be great. Well, I'll try, he said, and there was something like tired confidence in his voice. I'll have to drop by the workshop and check the brakes, but I think I'll have time. Kate nodded, although he again couldn't see her. Fine. Just. Let me know if anything changes, okay? Yes, of course, he answered quickly, almost automatically. How are you there? Everything is fine. Kate looked at her desk. An empty mug, scattered sticky notes, a letter she never finished writing. Yes, okay. Work as always. We have a new project with a server. It's a mess, but nothing new. Server? Mike chuckled. Our computer's glitching again. Something like that. Kate smiled slightly, although he didn't see it. We hired a new guy. He understands it. So far it seems to be working. Well, just as long as it's not like last time, when everything collapsed for you for a week, he said, and Kate remembered how 2 years ago their database went down, and she spent a week manually filling out timesheets. Okay, Kate, I have to go. I'll talk to the dispatcher and find out about the weekend. Okay, she hesitated, not knowing what else to say. Take care of yourself. Yeah, you too, he replied, and the line went dead. Kate put the phone down on the table, looking at the blank screen. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes, but she felt as if she had run a kilometer. Not from emotions, there were almost none, but from some kind of internal tension that always appeared when she talked to Mike. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. Mike promised to come. This wasn't the first time, and Kate knew the chances were 50-50. Last year, he promised to be home for her birthday, but ended up stuck somewhere in Nebraska due to a breakdown. She wasn't angry, or at least she tried not to be. It was his job. But every time he said, I'll try, she felt something shrink inside her. Kate, are you alive? Liz leaned out from behind the partition, holding a stack of documents in her hand. You're sitting there with a face like you've been fired. Kate opened her eyes and shook her head. Everything is fine. Mike just called. Oh, seriously? Liz perked up, her eyes lit up with curiosity. And what did you say? Will he come? He said that maybe he'll be there on the weekend. Kate shrugged, trying to speak casually. But you know how it happens. Yes, Liz grimaced. My brother was also a truck driver. I promised my mom to come for Christmas, but ended up sitting in Idaho because it was snowing. She paused, then added, but maybe this time it will work out. Maybe. Kate forced herself to smile, although her chest was still tight. Okay, what's with these documents? Oh, this is hell. Liz slammed the pack onto Kate's desk. Marge wants us to check all new employees' contracts before tomorrow. I already hate my life. Kate took the packet and flipped through the first pages. Seriously, we already have a lot of things to do. Yeah, welcome to the club, Liz signed and returned to her desk. If anything, I order pizza for lunch. Want? No, thank you. Kate shook her head. I have sandwiches in my bag. Sandwiches, Liz snorted. Kate, you live like a nun. We need to shake you up. I'll think about it, Kate replied, but her thoughts were already elsewhere. She opened the contract on the screen, but instead of the text, she saw Mike's face, not as it was now, but as it was 10 years ago, when he still laughed at her jokes and held her hand, even when they were just sitting on the couch. She shook her head, clearing away the memories, and began typing. But half an hour later, the phone vibrated again. It was a message from Mike. Talk to the dispatcher. So far, everything is according to plan. See you on Saturday. Kate read it twice, trying to understand how she felt. Joy? Doubt? She wrote back, Okay, I'm waiting. Drive carefully. And she added a sun emoticon, although she didn't know why. Maybe to make the message seem less dry. She put the phone down and went back to work, but it was difficult to concentrate. Her thoughts were confused. She either imagined Mike arriving and they sat at dinner as before, or she remembered how the last time he canceled everything at the last minute. Kate knew she shouldn't get her hopes up, but the spark she was trying to squash still smoldered. Kate, you're hovering around again. Liz threw a crumpled piece of paper at her. What do you have there? Love drama? Very funny. Kate caught the piece of paper and threw it back. I just think I need to buy something for dinner if Mike comes. Oh, romance. Liz folded her hands in the shape of a heart. Candles, wine, everything like in the movies. More like pizza and beer, Kate grinned, but her smile quickly faded. She wasn't sure that she and Mike could even be romantic. Not now. The rest of the day went by as usual. Calls, letters, an argument with Marge about deadlines, a short break for a sandwich that turned out dry because she forgot to put the sauce. Jake stopped by the office late in the afternoon to ask something about database access, and Kate found herself glad to see him. But they only exchanged a few words, and he left, leaving behind a slight feeling that she wanted to say something else. When Kate left the office, the sun was setting, and the air smelled of grass and asphalt. She got into the car, turned on the radio, but turned it off a minute later. The host was laughing too loudly again. On the way home, she stopped at the supermarket, bought chicken, potatoes, and a bottle of wine, although she wasn't sure that she and Mike would drink it. Maybe it was just a gesture, an attempt to make the weekend special, or prove to herself that she still believes in them. At home, she dropped her bag at the door, put the groceries in the refrigerator, and checked her phone. Nothing new. Mike didn't write. She turned on the kettle, brewed the same chamomile tea she hated, and sat down at the table. The silence was the same as yesterday, but now there was something else in it, a faint, almost imperceptible anticipation. Mike promised to come. And despite all her doubts, Kate wanted to believe that this time he would keep his word. Kate pushed open the door to the break room, and the smell of burnt coffee from the machine hit her nose like a warning. She winced, but headed towards the machine anyway, stuffing the coin into the slot. The office hummed with its usual rhythm: calls, the clatter of keyboards, the voice of Liz, who was arguing with someone on the phone about new forms. Kate had been trying to figure out the employee accounting software for 3 days now, and her patience was wearing away faster than the coffee in her thermal mug. Today, she decided that she deserved a break, even if the coffee from the machine was, as usual, disgusting. The machine hummed, releasing a thin stream of black liquid into the paper cup. Kate looked at her with slight disgust when the door behind her creaked and Jake entered. His plaid shirt was slightly wrinkled, and in his hands he held his plastic cup from Bean and Brew, which smelled like real coffee, not machine swill. "Are you drinking this again?" he asked, nodding at her glass as if she were holding a can of paint. Kate turned, raising an eyebrow. "Not everyone has to run to a coffee shop every 2 hours like some people do. I have a job here, you know." "Job?" Jake leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "I thought you were just sitting and dreaming of normal coffee." Very funny, Kate took a sip and immediately regretted it. The coffee was bitter and tasted of plastic. She put the glass on the table and sighed. "Okay, you win. This is rubbish." "I told you so," he grinned and raised his glass. "Go to Bean and Brew. They even know how to make lattes without the rubber taste." Maybe in the next life. Kate shook her head, but smiled. She couldn't help but notice how easily Jake fit into her day. This was the third time in a week that they had crossed paths in the break room, and each time their conversation dragged on longer than necessary. "Listen," Jake pushed off the wall and walked over to the table where the microwave stood. "I was thinking, if this machine is such a nightmare, maybe we can chip in and buy a normal coffee maker for the common good." Kate laughed as she imagined Marge's reaction to the idea of spending her budget on a coffee maker. "Marge would rather make us drink tea out of bags than give us money. She once refused to buy new chairs because the old ones were still holding up." Seriously, Jake raised his eyebrows. What, am I now going to sit on a chair that creaks like a cart until the end of the contract? Welcome to Bloomington, Kate shrugged, her voice becoming a little warmer. Everything here rests on your word of honor and tape. They fell silent, but the silence was not awkward. Kate picked up her drink, just to keep her hands busy, and looked at Jake. He was younger than her, not much, but enough for her to notice it. There was something relaxed in the way he spoke, as if he was never in a hurry, even when the office was burning with deadlines. "What are you looking at?" he asked suddenly, nodding at her phone lying on the table. The trailer for the series Dark Waters, which she found after their last conversation, was open on the screen. "Oh, that's—" Kate hesitated, feeling a little stupid. "Dark Waters. You advised. I've only looked at the trailer so far, but it looks gloomy." "Oh yes, this is it," Jake perked up, sitting down on the edge of the table. "By the third episode, it starts to get so bad that you don't even understand who's good and who's not. But they drink coffee in a diner like ours here." "Looks like Bloomington," Kate chuckled, and Jake laughed. "Exactly. Only our coffee is worse." He paused, then added, "If you start watching, tell me what you think. I spoiled the ending for myself, so I can give you a hint if you get confused." "Agreed," Kate nodded, feeling her shoulders relax. She couldn't remember the last time she chatted so easily with someone. With Mike, their conversations boiled down to "How are you?" and "Don't forget to pay the bill." With Liz to gossip, which was sometimes tiring. But with Jake it was different. He looked at her when he spoke, and it was unusual. It was as if she had been noticed. "What do you do anyway, besides work and TV series?" he asked, adjusting his watch strap. "Well, except for what you think about yoga." Kate snorted, remembering their previous conversation. "Oh, I'm full of surprises. For example, yesterday I spent half an hour choosing which yogurt to buy in the supermarket. This was the highlight of my day." "Seriously?" Jake pretended to be impressed. "And what did you choose? Strawberry or peach?" "Vanilla," Kate grinned. "I know how to live to the fullest." "Vanilla is bold," he nodded, feigning seriousness. "But I once bought yogurt with chia, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. Tastes like wet sand." Kate laughed, a little louder than she intended, and immediately looked around to see if anyone was looking into the room. "Okay, that sounds terrible. Remind me never to try chia." "Consider me saving you," Jake winked, and Kate felt a slight warmth in her chest. It wasn't like it was anything serious, just a moment when she wasn't thinking about deadlines, about Mike, about the container of pasta that was still sitting in the kitchen. "And you?" she asked, deciding to seize the initiative. "Besides saving people from bad yogurt and fixing servers." "Oh, I'm a simple man," he shrugged. "I watch TV series, play video games, sometimes I try to cook, but I usually end up with pizza. There's no place to cook in a motel, though, so I'm now a microwave burrito expert." "Microwave burritos?" Kate raised an eyebrow. "Is this your signature dish now?" "Yeah, I can give a master class," he grinned. "The main thing is not to forget to puncture the packaging, otherwise there will be an explosion." "Verified." Kate shook her head, but couldn't stop smiling. The conversation was stupid, but there was something liberating about it. She didn't try to be correct or serious. She was just being herself, or maybe a version of herself she had almost forgotten. "Listen, have you ever thought about something more?" she asked suddenly, not knowing why. "Well, I don't know. Move to a big city, open your own business, something like that." Jake looked at her, and his smile became a little more serious. "Sometimes. I used to want my own company. Nothing grand, just something different. But then, life got complicated. Contracts, travel, bills. And you? Was there something you dreamed about?" Kate hesitated. The question was simple, but she suddenly realized that she did not know the answer. "It was," she said quietly, looking at her glass. "I wanted to travel. Not all over the world, but see something new. Italy, maybe, or just travel around the States without a plan. But then work, home, everything. Not before. Italy is cool, Jake nodded, and there was no mockery in his voice. Pizza, wine, old streets. I was in Rome a couple of years ago for a conference. I ate pasta at some place, and I swear it was the best thing I've ever tried. Seriously, Kate looked at him, feeling slightly envious. How is it? Rome? Noisy, crowded, but lively, he shrugged. Everything seems to be breathing there. Even if you just sit in the square with coffee, you feel like you are part of something. Kate nodded, trying to imagine. She had never been further than Chicago, and only to a friend's wedding 10 years ago. Sounds like another world, she said quietly. Not so different, Jake smiled. You just have to make up your mind, at least for one trip. Maybe, Kate shrugged, but there was more doubt in her voice than she intended. She looked at her watch and sighed. Damn, I have to go. Marge will kill me if I don't finish this report. Duty calls, Jake stood up, finishing his coffee. But hey, if you start dark waters, write what you think. We agreed, Kate smiled, feeling her mood become lighter, and don't blow up the microwave. No promises, he winked and left. Kate remained in the room, looking at her half-drunk coffee. She couldn't explain why she felt better than half an hour ago. Maybe it was the conversation, the way Jake looked at her not as a colleague, but as a person. For the first time in a long time, she felt noticed. She threw the glass in the trash and returned to the table. Liz immediately leaned out from behind the partition. Well, were you chatting with the it guy again? She asked with a malicious grin. Liz, you're unbearable, Kate rolled her eyes, but her smile gave her away. We were just talking about TV series. Yeah, TV series, Liz chuckled. I see how you glow. Tell me what he said. Nothing special. Kate opened the mail, but her thoughts were still in the break room. Kate stood at the kitchen table, straightening her napkin next to her plate. She spent half an hour setting the table. Rosemary baked chicken, garlic potatoes, pecan salad, everything she bought on Wednesday, hoping Mike would come. There was a candle burning on the table, a cheap one from a supermarket, but its soft light made the kitchen cozier. Kate even put out a bottle of red wine, although she wasn't sure if they would drink it. It was a gesture, an attempt to make the evening special, like in those days when they still laughed at dinner and did not count the minutes until the end of the conversation. She looked at her watch, 20:47. Mike should have been home an hour ago. He wrote in the morning that he left Indianapolis and, if there were no traffic jams, would arrive at 7. Kate asked to leave work early, went to the store for fresh rosemary, and even put on her makeup, something she hadn't done at home for 100 years. She chose a dress, dark green, with long sleeves, that she had bought 2 years ago at a sale and only worn once. It fit perfectly, highlighting her figure, and Kate, looking at herself in the mirror before leaving the bedroom, thought that she looked good, maybe even better than usual. But now she stood in the kitchen, and the dress seemed unnecessary, like a suit at a party where no one came. The phone was lying on the table. The screen was dark. Kate checked him every 5 minutes, but there were no messages. She tried not to think about the worst: an accident, a breakdown, whatever, but her head was still filled with snippets of news about trucks that she had seen on the feed. She shook her head, clearing away the thoughts, and poured herself some water, just to keep her hands busy. At 21:03, the phone vibrated. Kate grabbed it so quickly that she almost dropped it. Message from Mike. Kate, sorry. The delivery took a while, so I needed to bring another batch. I don't have time today. Tomorrow is also in doubt. I'll call. She read the text twice, as if hoping the words would change. But they haven't changed. Kate put the phone down, feeling something heavy squeezing in her chest. Not anger, anger would be easier. It was a melancholy, as familiar as an old sweater she had worn too often. She looked at the table. The chicken had already cooled down, the candle was burning out, wax was dripping onto the tablecloth. It all looked stupid, like she was playing a play without an audience. Kate went to the closet and took out a glass and a bottle of wine that she had bought for dinner. She uncorked it, filled it halfway, and took a sip. The wine was tart, with a hint of blackcurrant, and for a moment she thought it might be too good for this evening. But then I took another sip, because who cares? She walked into the living room without turning on the overhead light, only the lamp in the corner, which gave off a warm, soft glow. The sofa creaked as she sat down, pulling her legs under her. The dress rode up and Kate pulled the hem down, suddenly feeling ridiculous. She put the glass on the coffee table and looked at her reflection in the dark window. It was blurry, but she could see the outlines. Neatly styled hair, the dress she had chosen so carefully. For whom? For Mike, who didn't show up again? Or for yourself, to prove that you are still capable of something more than work and chamomile tea? Kate stood up and walked to the mirror in the hallway. The light from the living room barely reached her, but she saw herself. The mascara was a little smeared under her eyes, the lipstick had worn off, but the dress still looked beautiful. She ran her hand over the fabric, remembering how she'd bought it thinking she'd wear it to a special occasion. Today was supposed to be such a case. She wanted Mike to see her not in an old t-shirt, not with a tired face after work, but like this alive, real. But he didn't see. "Okay," she said quietly, turning to her reflection. But the voice trembled, and she turned away, not wanting to see how her eyes began to shine. Returning to the kitchen, Kate began clearing the table. She wrapped the chicken in foil, put the potatoes in a container, and covered the salad with foil. She did all this mechanically, like a robot, trying not to think about how long she had been preparing this dinner. The candle burned out, leaving a puddle of wax on the tablecloth, and Kate simply swept it into the trash. She put the bottle of wine in the refrigerator, although she took the glass with her back to the living room. She turned on the TV just to break the silence. There was some old sitcom where everyone was laughing too loudly, and Kate switched to another channel. They were showing a cooking show where the host was enthusiastically chopping onions. She left it, but didn't look. Instead, she picked up her phone and opened a message from Mike. Fingers froze over the keyboard. She wanted to write something, "Why again? You promised," or at least, "Okay, call tomorrow." But I didn't write anything. Instead, she simply locked the screen and leaned back on the couch. The wine in the glass was almost empty, and Kate thought about pouring more, but decided that she didn't want to. She didn't need drunken sadness, sober was enough. She closed her eyes as she listened to the host on the screen praising his sauce. Snippets of the day were running through her head. The conversation with Jake in the break room, his joke about microwave burritos, Liz teasing her about the new guy again. And then Mike, his voice on the phone, his "I'll try," which always ended the way it did today. Kate opened her eyes and looked at her watch. 22:19. The evening she had planned died before it began. She could have called Liz to chat about something, but she didn't want to. I could have turned on Dark Waters, the series that Jake recommended, but I didn't have the energy. Instead, she just sat there, holding her empty glass, and listened to the ticking clock on the wall. She thought about Mike. Where was he now? In the cab of a truck, in some diner, or already sleeping in a motel along the highway? She tried to remember the last time they spent a weekend together, without the rush, without his gotta-go attitude. A year ago? 2? The memories were dim, like old photographs that she never looked at. Kate stood up, took her glass to the sink, and looked at her reflection in the kitchen window. The dress was still beautiful, but now it seemed foreign. She ran her hand through her hair, brushing a strand out of her face, and thought that maybe she would wear it again tomorrow. Not for Mike, not for anyone else, just for myself. But this thought was weak, like the light of a candle that she had blown out an hour ago. She turned off the light in the kitchen and went upstairs to the bedroom. The bed was cold, and Kate lay down without changing her clothes. Kate was sitting on the sofa, staring at the TV, where the next episode of a cooking show was playing. The host kneaded the dough enthusiastically, but she did not follow him. Her thoughts wandered somewhere between yesterday's message from Mike and the empty kitchen table, where the container of cold chicken still stood. It was Saturday afternoon, and the house seemed too big and too quiet. She tried to keep herself busy. She washed the clothes, wiped the dust, even watered the cactus, which, it seemed, had not needed water for a long time. But all this did not help. The melancholy that settled in my chest after last night did not go away. Kate stood up, turned off the TV, and looked at her phone. No new messages. She opened the messenger, thought about Liz, but changed her mind. Liz would start asking questions, teasing, and Kate didn't want to talk about Mike or how ridiculous she felt in that green dress. Instead, she grabbed her keys, put on jeans and a light sweater, and left the house. She needed movement, noise, anything, just not this silence. Bean and Brew was a 10-minute walk away, on a street corner that always smelled of freshly cut grass and asphalt. Kate rarely went there. Coffee was cheaper at home, and the office had a machine, albeit a disgusting one. But today she wanted something different. Maybe some normal coffee. Maybe just the people around. The coffee shop was crowded, but not noisy. Behind the counter, a barista with a nose piercing deftly operated a coffee machine, and in the corner, a couple of students hunched over their laptops. Kate stood in line, studying the menu on the board. Latte, Americano, cappuccino, everything sounded better than what she drank in the office. She ordered a vanilla latte, paid, and went to the counter where orders were given out. While she was waiting, her gaze glanced across the hall and froze. Jake sat by the window at a small table, buried in a book. His plaid shirt had been replaced with a plain gray t-shirt, and a mug sat next to him, half empty. Kate felt her pulse quicken slightly. She didn't expect to see him here, but to be honest, she was happy. He looked relaxed, almost at home, and it was strange to see him out of the office, without his laptop bag and jokes about servers. Kate? The barista handed her a glass, and she shuddered, distracted. Vanilla latte. Thank you, she muttered, took the coffee and turned around. Jake was still reading, not noticing her. Kate hesitated for a moment. She could have just walked away, sat in another corner, pretended she didn't see him. But instead, her legs carried her to his table. I didn't think that people read paper books, she said, stopping nearby. Her voice was light, with a hint of mockery to hide the awkwardness. Jake raised his head, and his face lit up with a surprised smile. Kate? Seriously? He closed the book, putting it on the table. And I thought you were sitting at home, watching the series. I decided to take a walk, Kate shrugged, holding the glass with both hands. What, do you live in this coffee shop? I thought the motel was your base. Well, the motel is good for sleeping, but the coffee here is better. He nodded at his mug. Take a seat. Kate smiled and sat down opposite, putting the glass on the table. What are you doing at the coffee shop on Saturday? I thought you were the type to spend your weekends cleaning or, I don't know, baking cupcakes. Baking cupcakes? Kate raised an eyebrow. You clearly overestimate my talents. I just... She hesitated, not knowing how to explain. I just wanted to get out of the house. And you? Are you reading something smart? She nodded at the book. It was a tattered volume of The Catcher in the Rye. Smart. Jake chuckled, running his finger over the cover. More like nostalgia. I read this once and decided to reread it. I want to understand why I liked it so much then. And how? Kate took a sip of her latte. The coffee was warm, with a soft vanilla aftertaste, and she couldn't help but relax. I don't know yet, he shrugged. Back then I thought Holden Caulfield was a rebel, but now it seems like he's just a confused kid. But maybe I'm just older and more boring. More boring? Kate grinned. You live in a motel and eat microwave burritos. It's not completely boring. Oh, this is an adventure, Jake laughed, and his laughter was so sincere that Kate couldn't help but smile wider. And you? What adventures are you having, besides the choice of vanilla yogurt? Well, I was cooking dinner yesterday, she said, and her voice trembled a little. She didn't want to talk about Mike, about the thwarted plans, but the words came out. I even set the table like in a restaurant. But, in the end, I ate alone. Jake looked at her, and his smile became softer. This sucks, he said simply, without pity, but with understanding. I once cooked a steak for a girl, and she was 3 hours late. In the end, I ate both steaks and watched football, not that bad, and it turned out to be an evening. Kate laughed at the thought. Both? Seriously? Yeah, he nodded, and I don't regret it a bit. Although the steak was so-so. What about your dinner? Hopefully better than mine. Chicken with rosemary, Kate shrugged, trying to sound casual. Not bad, but now my refrigerator is full of leftovers. Maybe I'll eat it until next Friday. Chicken with rosemary, Jake whistled. This is already a level. I wouldn't dare do that. Maximum pasta with sauce from a jar. Don't be too poor, Kate shook her head. You said you were trying to cook. Trying is the key word, he grinned. Yesterday, I almost burned down a motel trying to heat up frozen pizza. The smoke alarm was delighted. Kate laughed so loudly that the couple at the next table turned around. She covered her mouth with her hand, but couldn't stop. Okay, you're officially the worst cook I know. Hey, that's a title, Jake pretended to be offended. But seriously, you need to show me how to cook that chicken of yours. I can't live on burritos forever. Maybe someday, Kate smiled, but her heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to think about how it sounded like a plan, like something more than just talk. She took another sip of coffee to distract herself. They chatted for another half hour, jumping from topic to topic, about how Jake once got stuck in an elevator for 2 hours, about how Kate tried to play the flute at school and sounded like a sick goose, about why pizza with pineapples is a crime. The conversation flowed easily, as if they had known each other not for a week, but for years. Kate didn't notice how time was slipping away, how her coffee was getting cold, how the coffee shop was starting to empty. Listen, Jake looked at his watch. I don't want to kick you out, but I have a meeting with the landlord in an hour. We need to look at the apartment, otherwise the motel is starting to get boring. Apartment? Kate raised her eyebrows. Have you decided to stay in Bloomington? Well, not forever, he shrugged. But the contract can be extended, so I thought, why not live like a human? Without a dancing neighbor. Wise, Kate smiled, but something stabbed in her chest. She didn't want to think about what that meant he could stay longer. The Bean and Brew coffee shop began to quiet down as the last customers picked up their cups and headed out into the evening Bloomington. Kate sipped her cool vanilla latte, feeling her shoulders relax for the first time that day. Across from her, Jake was leafing through his tattered copy of The Catcher in the Rye, but he was no longer reading, just holding the book like an anchor while they chatted. The conversation flowed from jokes about his motel adventures to memories of his school days, and Kate found herself laughing more often than she expected. Listen, Jake closed the book and looked at her, tilting his head slightly. It's getting stuffy here. Maybe we can go for a walk. I haven't seen Bloomington yet other than the coffee shop and gas station. Kate hesitated, looking at the empty glass in her hands. She had to go home. There was a container with chicken waiting, an unclean tablecloth, a silence that was more oppressive than she wanted to admit. But the thought of a walk, of delaying the return a little longer, was too tempting. Well, why not, she said, trying to sound casual. Just don't expect me to be a guide. I know 3 streets and a supermarket here. That's already more than I have, Jake grinned, standing up. Let's go before I order another coffee and stay here. Kate smiled, grabbed her bag, and they went outside. The evening air was cool, with a slight smell of grass and asphalt warmed by the afternoon sun. The sky over Bloomington had already darkened, and the first stars were breaking through the city light. The street was quiet, except for the sound of a car somewhere in the distance, and a couple of teenagers on bicycles rushed past, laughing. Where are we going? Jake asked, putting his hands in his jeans pockets. His t-shirt bulged slightly on his shoulders, and Kate suddenly noticed that he looked younger outside the office, without his laptop bag. I don't know, Kate shrugged, looking at the sidewalk. There is a park nearby, there is a lake. Nothing special, but quiet. Quiet is good, he nodded. Lead the way, local expert. Kate chuckled, and they walked down the street, avoiding cracks in the asphalt. The conversation started with light chatter. Do you really think that pineapple pizza is a crime? She asked, remembering their argument in the coffee shop. By the way, I eat it with pleasure. Kate, this is heresy. Jake shook his head, pretending to be serious. Pineapples are a fruit. Pizza is sacred. Mixing them up is like wearing socks with sandals. Oh, are you a fashion expert now? Kate laughed, nudging him with her shoulder. Remind me who lives in a motel and eats burritos from the microwave. Hey, it's a way of life. He pressed his hand to his chest, as if defending his honor. Burritos are art, and pineapples on pizza, I'm just too lazy to come up with a normal topping. They continued arguing until they reached the park. The trees rustled their leaves, and the lanterns cast soft circles of light on the paths. The lake sparkled in the darkness, reflecting the stars, and Kate suddenly felt her chest tightening not from melancholy, but from something else that she could not name. She slowed down, looking at the water. Beautiful, Jake said, stopping at the railing. Do you come here often? Not really, Kate shrugged, leaning on the railing next to him. I used to come more often when, I don't know, I wanted to think. Now there's somehow no time for that. I understand, he nodded, looking at the lake. I had the same park in my last city. I sat there when I needed to clear my head, especially after work. Was the work difficult? Kate asked, turning to him. She suddenly wondered how he lived before Bloomington, before the motel and microwave burritos. Not really, Jake shrugged. Just monotonous. Fixing servers, writing code, listening to the boss yelling that everything was needed yesterday. Sometimes you just wanted to go somewhere where no one knew your name. Kate nodded, feeling his words resonate with her. You know, I sometimes think about the same thing. Just get in the car and drive away. No plan, no deadlines. But then I remember about the mortgage, work, everything, and I stay. Yes, life is a champion of plans, Jake chuckled, but there was no bitterness in his voice. But you know, sometimes just this is enough. He nodded at the lake, at the stars. Go out, walk, talk. Already something. Kate looked at him, and her heart made a strange leap. He spoke so simply, but there was something in his words that made her feel alive. Not just an HR manager, not just a wife who is waiting for her husband, but someone who can laugh, dream, be. But this feeling was mixed with anxiety that she could not explain. What is she doing? Why walk through the park with a guy you've known for a week and feel like they've been friends for 100 years? What would you do if you could get out? She asked to take her mind off her thoughts. Well, no bills, no contracts. Where would you go? Jake thought, scratching the back of his head. Probably to Mexico. It's warm there, the food is spicy, and no one asks when you'll hand in your report. And you? Italy, Kate answered almost immediately, and her voice became quieter. I want to sit in some square, eat pasta, and pretend that I don't have a mailbox full of letters. Good choice, Jake smiled. Just don't forget the wine. Italians don't eat without it. I'll remember, Kate laughed, but her laughter quickly faded. She looked up at the stars, feeling the anxiety growing in her chest. She felt good too good. She shouldn't have felt this way. Not with him. Not now. Are you okay? Jake asked, noticing her silence. His voice was soft, without pressure. Yes, Kate forced herself to smile. It's just, I haven't walked like this for a long time. I forgot how it is. Then we need to do it more often. He nudged her with his shoulder, and his smile was so warm that Kate wanted to stay and run away at the same time. Bloomington may not be Italy, but the stars are nothing here. True, Kate nodded, looking at the sky. They stood in silence, and she felt time slow down. She didn't want this moment to end, but at the same time she knew it had to. She couldn't allow herself to drown in this feeling, not with Mike, not with her life that was waiting for her at home. Shall we go back? She suggested, moving away from the railing. Otherwise, I won't tomorrow, I'll get up. Agreed, Jake nodded, and they walked back along the path. The streets of Bloomington were quiet, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk as Kate and Jake walked back from the park. They turned onto her street, and Kate's house came into view 2 stories, with peeling paint on the porch and dim lights in the hallway that she had forgotten to turn off. She slowed down without realizing it, and Jake slowed down too, putting his hands in his pockets. Well, here is my palace, said Kate, nodding towards the house. Her voice was light, but there was awkwardness in it. She didn't know how to end this evening. She didn't want it to end, but she couldn't figure out what to do next. Not bad. Jake looked around the house, then looked at her with a slight smile. Better than my motel. Even the curtains smell of cigarettes, although I don't smoke. Kate chuckled, feeling the tension ease slightly. Sounds like a five-star resort. Want to see what a house looks like without dancing neighbors. She said it as a joke, but the words hung in the air and her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't planned to call him, but now that she had said it, she didn't want to take it back. Jake looked at her and his smile became softer. Only if you promise not to treat me to chamomile tea. I heard you hate him. Kate laughed, and it was like an exhalation. Agreed, but I warn you, I only have wine and leftover chicken. This is better than a microwave burrito, he shrugged, and they walked to the porch. Kate unlocked the door, and the creaking of the hinges seemed louder than usual. The hallway smelled of last night's dinner and a little lavender from the diffuser she bought on sale and rarely turned on. She turned on the light, dropped her bag on the floor, and took off her sneakers, feeling strangely vulnerable. Jake entered next, looking around with curiosity, but without intrusiveness. Cozy, he said, stopping at a shelf with photographs. In one of them, Kate and Mike stood by the lake, smiling. The picture was taken about 8 years ago. Jake didn't ask about him, and Kate was grateful for that. Would you like some wine? She asked, heading into the kitchen to keep her hands busy. I have red, or water, if you're in favor of sobriety. The wine sounds great, he replied, following her. But only if you don't force me to understand the varieties. I'm completely new to this. Kate smiled, taking a bottle out of the refrigerator, the same one she opened yesterday when Mike didn't arrive. She poured 2 glasses, trying not to think about how it looked from the outside. He, evening wine. This wasn't what she had planned. This wasn't the plan at all. Why are we drinking? Jake asked, taking the glass. He stood at the kitchen table, his fingers tapping lightly on the glass. For, Kate hesitated, looking at the wine. For normal coffee and the absence of microwave disasters. I support that, he clinked glasses with her, and their glasses clinked quietly. The wine was tart, and Kate took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. They sat down at the table, and the conversation flowed on. Jake told how he once got stuck at the airport for a day and learned to play cards with the security guard. Kate shared a story about how she tried to throw a party in college and ended up spilling punches on the dean's carpet. They laughed, interrupting each other, and Kate did not notice how time was slipping away. But at some point she caught his gaze, not playful, not light, but attentive, almost studying. Her laughter stopped, and she looked away, feeling her cheeks grow warm. What? She asked, fiddling with the edge of the napkin. Nothing, Jake shrugged, but his smile was softer than usual. You're just different when you laugh. Not like in the office. Kate hesitated, not knowing what to answer. Well, in the office, I'm trying not to kill anyone because of vacation schedules, she said, trying to regain her lightness. And here, it's just a day off. It's good to have weekends like this, he nodded, and his voice was quiet, almost intimate. Kate felt her pulse speeding up, and it scared her. She shouldn't have wanted this, not this look, not this warmth that grew between them. Shall we go to the living room? She suggested, standing up. She needed movement, space, anything to break this moment. It's more comfortable there than on these chairs. Lead on, Jake stood up, taking his glass, and they moved into the living room. Kate only turned on the lamp in the corner, leaving the room in semi-darkness. The sofa was old, with a sagging place, and she sat down on her usual corner, pulling her legs up. Jake positioned himself at the other end, but even that distance seemed too short. Okay, he took a sip of wine, looking at her. Tell me something I don't know. Not about work, not about yogurt. Something real. Kate looked at him, feeling her throat tighten. Real? She ran her finger along the rim of the glass. I don't know. I'm probably not very interested. I live here, work. Sometimes I dream about something, but I don't do it. That's something. Jake leaned a little closer, and his voice was soft. What are you dreaming about? Kate fell silent, looking at the wine in her glass. About feeling alive, she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. Don't just go in circles, work, home, bills, and to be, I don't know, someone who isn't afraid. Jake looked at her, and there was neither mockery nor pity in his eyes. You know, I think you're already alive, he said quietly. I just maybe forgot what it's like. Kate felt her eyes sting and quickly looked away. She didn't want to cry and didn't want him to see her weakness. But his words touched something deep inside, and she didn't know how to deal with it. She put the glass on the table and looked at him. He was closer than she expected, and his face was soft, open, without the usual irony. Neither of them said a word. Kate didn't know who made the first move, maybe she, maybe he. But suddenly his hand was on her hand, warm and careful, and she did not move away. Her breathing hitched, and she looked into his eyes, looking for something in them, an answer, permission, a reason to stop. But instead she leaned closer, and their lips met. The kiss was not passionate, not desperate, but quiet, almost timid, as if they were both afraid of frightening the moment. Kate felt the taste of wine on his lips, the warmth of his breath, and her heart was pounding so loudly that she was sure he could hear it. It wasn't about desire, it was about need, about feeling needed, alive, here and now. They pulled away, but not far. Jake looked at her, his hand still on hers. Kate, he began, but she shook her head. Don't, she whispered. Just shut up. He nodded, and they kissed again, slower, softer. Kate didn't think about Mike, didn't think about tomorrow, didn't think about what it meant. She was just there in this moment, in this warmth, in this feeling that she had forgotten so long ago. They moved upstairs to the bedroom. Everything happened naturally, without fishing, no promises. It was not passion, not romance, it was the need for intimacy, for someone to be nearby, for the skin to feel warm, so that the heart does not beat in emptiness. Kate didn't think about the consequences, didn't think about the guilt. She just allowed herself to be. When they lay down next to each other, her head lay on his shoulder, and the silence was soft, like a blanket. Jake didn't try to speak, and Kate was grateful for that. She closed her eyes, listening to his breathing, and for the first time in a long time she didn't feel alone. But somewhere deep down, under this warmth, anxiety was still smoldering weak, but stubborn. She didn't know what would happen in the morning and didn't want to think about it. Bye. The morning light filtered through the curtains, drawing thin streaks across the wooden floor of the bedroom. Kate lay on her side, looking at the empty side of the bed where Jake had been just a few hours ago. The sheet was rumpled, but already cooled, and nothing remained of his presence except the slight smell of his cologne, something simple, with a hint of pine. She did not move, listening to the silence of the house. The clock on the wall was ticking, and this sound was the only thing that disturbed the morning emptiness. Kate had not slept for the last half hour, although her eyes were closed. She heard Jake stand up, quietly get ready, and hear the floorboards creak as he walked down the stairs. He didn't wake her up, didn't leave a note, didn't say anything, and she didn't ask. When the door downstairs clicked softly, Kate just lay there, looking at the ceiling, trying to figure out what she was feeling. It wasn't pain, it wasn't guilt, just a strange, dull emptiness, like after a long sleep when you can't remember what you dreamed. She finally stood up, pulling on an old t-shirt and jeans that were lying on the chair. In the bedroom mirror, her reflection looked tired. Her hair was disheveled, there were shadows under her eyes, but nothing dramatic. She didn't feel different, although she knew she should. A night with Jake was not what she had planned, not who she was, or at least who she thought she was. But now, in the cold light of the morning, it seemed almost unreal, like a scene from someone else's film. Kate went down to the kitchen. Glasses from yesterday's wine stood on the table, one with a mark of her lipstick, the other empty. She put them away in the sink, turned on the kettle, and looked at the container of chicken that was still taking up space in the refrigerator. She didn't feel like eating, but she forced herself to get the yogurt and a spoon. Routine helped. Don't think, don't fumble, just move. The phone was lying on the table, and Kate checked it, more out of habit. Message from Liz. Are you alive? What did you do yesterday? Tell me. Kate smiled, but the smile came out crooked. She wasn't going to tell Liz about Jake, about the walk, about what happened next. It was none of her business, and Kate herself didn't know how to explain it. "Alive," she muttered, typing the answer. "I was just walking, nothing special." "How are you?" Liz replied a minute later. "Walking. With whom? Don't spill the beans, Kate. I know you're hiding something." Kate rolled her eyes, but her fingers hovered over the screen. She could have laughed it off like she always did, but instead she simply wrote, "Calm down, gossip girl. Nothing interesting. Let's talk in the office." She put the phone down without waiting for an answer and took a sip of tea, chamomile, as luck would have it. She winced, but finished her drink because it was a pity to throw it away. The rest of the weekend passed in a bit of a fog. Kate was cleaning the house, watching a TV show that Jake recommended, but she couldn't concentrate. Her thoughts returned to that night, not to the details, but to the feeling. The warmth of his hands, the silence in which there was no need to explain anything. She didn't feel guilty, but she didn't feel relieved either. It was something in the middle, like an unfinished letter that you don't know whether to send or burn. On Monday morning, Kate walked into the office with a slight sense of déjà vu. The air conditioner hummed, Liz tapped away at her keyboard, and the smell of coffee from the machine reminded her why she hated this place. She tossed her bag onto a chair, turned on her computer, and began sorting through her mail, trying not to think about whether she'd see Jake in the break room. "Kate, you're like a ghost." Liz leaned out from behind the partition, holding a stack of documents in her hand. "What's wrong with you? You look like you haven't slept in a week." "Just a weekend," Kate shrugged, opening the letter from Marge. "Lots of things to do." "Business." Liz narrowed her eyes. "You said you were walking. With whom, eh? Don't delay, I'll find out anyway." "Liz, you're insufferable." Kate shook her head, but smiled to soften her tone. "Nobody, just around the park, around the coffee shop. Ordinary." "The usual," Liz snorted, but retreated, returning to her papers. "Okay, but I'm watching you." Kate stared at the screen, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She expected, without admitting it to herself, that Jake would come in, ask about the server, joke about the coffee. But he wasn't there. Not at 10, not at noon, not during lunch, when she deliberately went to the break room, although she did not want coffee. She tried not to attach any importance to it, but by 2 o'clock in the afternoon her patience had run out. "Liz," Kate turned to her colleague, trying to sound casual. "Have you seen that guy? Jake? He had to do something with the server." Liz raised her head and her eyes lit up. "Oh, so that's it? A guy then?" She giggled, but noticing Kate's gaze, she changed her tone. "Nope, I didn't see it. But I heard that his project was suspended. It seems that the budget was cut, and he probably left." Kate froze, feeling her throat tighten. "Left?" she asked again, trying not to let her voice give her away. "When?" "I don't know," Liz shrugged. "Maybe on Friday, maybe on the weekend. Marge said something this morning about temporary contracts. You know how we decide everything at the last minute." "Yeah," Kate nodded, returning to the screen. Her fingers were on the keyboard, but she wasn't typing. "Left. Just like that, without a word, without a message." She didn't know what she expected, that he didn't know her name, didn't ask where he was going, and didn't ask her to stay. She couldn't explain why it bothered her so much. It was none of her business, but it still seemed important. She opened the messenger and found his name, Jake Pierce. The last message was from Thursday, when he wrote, "If you start dark waters, don't watch the spoilers." She looked at these words as if they could explain something, but they were as light and empty as their conversations. She didn't write to him, didn't call him, and so did he. Kate closed the app and leaned back in her chair. Her gaze fell on the empty thermal mug, which she had not filled today. She thought about how she and Jake had laughed over coffee from the machine, how he had winked and promised to bring her a proper latte. It was so recent, but it seemed like a lifetime had passed. "Kate, are you going to the meeting?" Liz's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "Yes, now." Kate stood up, grabbed her notebook, and walked towards the conference room. She and I tried to concentrate on my work, on Marge's words, on the numbers that flashed on the screen. but her thoughts kept returning to that night, to the silence, to his breathing, to how alive she felt. And now that he was gone, she didn't know what to do about it. She didn't know if she wanted to do anything about it. She returned to her desk, opened her mail, and began typing a response to another letter. But her fingers froze, and she looked out the window. The sky was gray, as if Bloomington felt her mood too. Kate was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, when she heard the sound of an engine outside the window. She froze, listening. The hum was familiar, low, slightly hoarse, like Mike's truck. She looked at her watch, 1837. He did not warn that he was coming, but after a week of silence, it was not surprising. Kate put the phone down, stood up, and walked to the window. The truck's headlights shone through the curtains, and she saw Mike turn off the engine and open the door. She didn't know what she was feeling. There was no joy, no relief, only slight tension, like before meeting someone whom I had not seen for a long time. Kate straightened her sweater, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and walked towards the door. She didn't want to look like she was waiting, but she didn't want to seem indifferent either. Everything was too complicated. The door opened and Mike walked in, carrying with him the smell of the road, a mixture of gasoline, dust, and something metallic. His jeans were wrinkled, his jacket was shabby, and there were shadows under his eyes. He looked older than she remembered, even though it had only been a couple of weeks. "Hi," he said, putting his bag on the floor. His voice was hoarse, tired, but familiar. "Hi," Kate nodded, leaning against the wall in the hallway. "I didn't know you were coming today." "Yes," Mike coughed, taking off his jacket. "The dispatcher gave the day off. I decided to go home rather than sit in a motel." Kate nodded, not knowing what to say. She noticed him looking around the hallway, as if checking that everything was in place. His gaze lingered on her shoes by the door, but he said nothing. "Hungry?" she asked to break the silence. "I have leftover chicken, or I can heat something up." "Chicken is fine," he shrugged, walking into the kitchen. "I'll just take a shower, if you don't mind." Of course, Kate stepped back, allowing him to pass. She watched him walk up the stairs and felt her chest tighten. This was their home, their life, but everything seemed alien. She couldn't remember the last time they talked about anything other than food, bills, or his flights. Kate returned to the kitchen, took the container of chicken out of the refrigerator, and put it in the microwave. The scent of rosemary filled the room, reminiscent of that evening when she was preparing dinner, hoping Mike would arrive. Now he was here, but everything was different. She took out 2 plates, forks, and put a bottle of water on the table. Everything was mechanical, as if she was performing a task. Mike came down 15 minutes later, wearing a clean t-shirt and jeans. His hair was damp and he smelled of soap, but he was still tired. He sat down at the table, looking at the plate of chicken that Kate had just heated up. "Looks good," he said, picking up the fork. "Did you cook?" "Yes, last week." Kate sat down opposite him, holding a glass of water. "I wanted to do something special, but, well, you were busy." Mike looked at her, and his eyebrows furrowed slightly. "Yes, sorry about that. The delivery took longer, then another one, then a breakdown. You know how it happens." "I know," Kate nodded, looking into her glass. She didn't want to start this conversation about his work, about how he disappears, about how she waits. But the silence between them was heavy, and she couldn't bear it. It would be nice if you gave me a warning. Or called." Mike put his fork down, looking at her. "I wrote it. I said that I don't have time." "Wrote," Kate shrugged, trying to keep her voice even. "But it's not the same thing. I don't know where you are, what's wrong with you. Sometimes it seems that you have completely forgotten that you have a home." "Kate," he sighed, rubbing his forehead, "I haven't forgotten. It's just the way it works. You knew when we started." "I knew," she nodded, feeling her throat tighten. "But that doesn't mean it's easy for me. You're leaving, I'm here, and that's it. We don't even speak normally." Mike fell silent, looking at his plate. Kate waited for him to say something to justify himself, to get angry, at least something. But he just nodded, as if agreeing with something he didn't want to admit. Okay, he said finally. I'll try to call more often. But you too. I don't know, you could write. I'm not a telepath. Kate looked at him, and her lips twitched into a faint smile. Right? And what will I write? Hey, I'm eating yogurt and sorting out papers again. Well, at least it's something, Mike shrugged, and there was something like warmth in his voice. Better than nothing. They fell silent, and Kate took a sip of water to keep her hands busy. Her thoughts involuntarily slid to Jake, to that night, to his look, to the way he was silent when it was necessary. She wasn't going to tell Mike, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't know how. It wasn't an affair, it wasn't cheating in the sense that people usually think. It was something different, and yet she felt it lay between them, even if Mike knew nothing. How's work? He asked, cutting off a piece of chicken. Still a mess with the servers. Kate nodded, grateful for the change of topic. Yes, as always. New guy. She paused, but quickly continued. They hired a temporary worker, but his contract was suspended. So now it's all on us again. Typical, Mike chuckled, chewing. It's the same thing at our depot. They hired a mechanic, but he quit a week later. Now I'm tinkering with the brakes myself. Seriously? Kate looked at him, trying to imagine. You hate this. I hate it, he nodded, and his lips twitched into a smile. But what to do? If not me, then who? Kate smiled back, and for a second she thought they were the same people they used to be again, two people who could talk about little things and laugh about them. But the moment passed and silence returned. She noticed how far they had grown apart. His movements were familiar, the way he held a fork, the way he rubbed his neck when he was tired, but she couldn't remember the last time she had felt his closeness. Not physical, but real. How are you in general? Mike asked, pushing his plate away. Not about work. Just you. Kate hesitated, looking at her hands. Okay, she said, but the words sounded empty. Just living, day after day. Sometimes it feels like I'm just going with the flow. Mike nodded, and his gaze became more serious. You know, sometimes I feel that way too. On the highway, at night, when you are driving and only headlights are ahead. You wonder where this is all leading. Kate looked at him, surprised. Mike rarely spoke like that openly, without jokes or evasiveness. And where? She asked quietly. I don't know, he shrugged, and his voice was quieter than usual. But I don't want us to just float, Kate. You and me. She felt her throat tighten and looked away. She wanted to say something about how tired she was of waiting, how lonely she was, how afraid she was that they had become strangers. But instead, she simply nodded. Me too, she whispered. They sat in silence, and Kate listened to the ticking clock on the wall. She didn't talk about Jake, not because she was afraid, but because it didn't make sense. That night was not about love, not about betrayal, it was about herself, about her need to feel alive. But now, looking at Mike, she realized that this life, their life, was still here, even if it was tattered and full of cracks. I'm going to go to bed, Mike said, getting up. Tired as a dog. Are you coming? Soon, Kate shook her head. I want to clean it up here. He nodded and went upstairs, and Kate remained at the table, looking at the empty plates. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt that something had to change. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. She just didn't know where to start. Kate sat on the living room couch with her knees pulled up to her chest. The lamp in the corner cast a warm light, but the room still seemed cold. The TV was turned off, and the silence was broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the distant noise of a car outside the window. Mike was home for the third day, a rarity in recent months. He sat in the chair opposite her, scrolling through something on his phone, but Kate knew he wasn't reading. His fingers moved mechanically across the screen, as if he was just waiting to get up and leave. She looked at him, trying to remember the last time they talked about anything other than bills, food, or his flights. Everything she felt: boredom, loneliness, fear that their life had turned into an endless cycle accumulated inside, like dust in the corners. She didn't want a quarrel, she didn't want accusations, but the silence became unbearable. Mike, she said quietly, almost in a whisper, but he immediately raised his head. Can we talk? He put the phone down and his eyebrows furrowed slightly. Certainly. What's happened? Kate hesitated, looking at her hands. She didn't know how to start, but the words were already bursting out. I I don't know how to say it. It's just, I feel like I'm drowning. Here in this life. Every day is the same. Work, home, waiting for you to arrive. And even when you are here, it seems to me that you are not there. Mike looked at her, his face motionless, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't interrupt, and that gave her the courage to continue. I don't blame you, she added quickly. This is not about you doing something wrong. I feel lonely, all the time, and I'm afraid it will always be like this, that I will remain. Unnecessary. No one. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked away, clenching her fingers. She didn't want to cry, didn't want it to look like a complaint. But the truth she had kept inside for so long was heavy, and now she lay between them, open and vulnerable. Mike was silent, and Kate felt her heart clench. She waited for him to say something to justify himself, to get angry, to brush it off. But he just looked at her, and his silence was louder than words. Finally, he coughed and sat back in his chair, rubbing his neck. I didn't know you felt that way, he said slowly, and his voice was hoarse, as if the words were difficult. I thought you were coping. You always managed. Kate shook her head, looking at the floor. I can't cope, Mike. I'm pretending, because I don't know how else. You leave, I stay, and all I have is this job, this house, this ticking clock. She nodded at the wall, and her lips twitched into a weak smile. Sometimes I think I'm just disappearing. Mike leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His hands clasped together, and Kate noticed his fingers tremble slightly. Kate, baby, he began, but fell silent, as if searching for words. I don't know what to do with this. I'm tired too. Not from the road, although it bothers me, because I can't be what you want. Kate looked at him, and her eyebrows rose. I don't want you to be anyone else, she said quietly. I just want you to be here. Not physically, and with us, with me. He nodded, and his gaze fell to the floor. I'm trying, he said, his voice almost a whisper. But you know, on the track, everything is simple there. You drive, do work, sleep. And here, I see you, I see this house, and I feel like I can't cope. As a husband, I don't know, as a person, I don't know how to fix this. Kate felt her throat tighten. She didn't expect him to say something like that. Mike rarely talked about his feelings. He was a man of action, a man who fixed trucks and paid bills. But now he sat in front of her, open, vulnerable, and it was both frightening and right. I don't know how to fix it either, she admitted, and her voice was soft. But I don't want us to just go with the flow. We're not even talking, Mike. We just exist side by side. He nodded, and his lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, he said finally, I see it. And I don't like it. I don't want you to feel alone. Or unnecessary. You're not like that, Kate. She looked at him, and her eyes stung. Then why do I think so? She asked, and her voice trembled. Why do I feel like I'm just part of the house for you? How's the furniture? Mike flinched as if her words had struck him. He opened his mouth to answer, but fell silent, rubbing his face with his hands. Damn, Kate, he muttered. I don't know how it happened. I always thought you were strong, that you don't need me to be here every minute. Kate nodded, feeling tears welling up, but she blinked them away. Maybe we both ran away, she said quietly. I'm going to work, to do my routine. You are on the road, and now we're here, and I don't know who we are to each other. He looked at her, and his gaze was heavy, but not angry. You are my wife, he said simply, but there was something in his voice that Kate had not heard for a long time conviction. And I don't want that to change. But I don't know how to make it better. Kate felt her heart clench. She didn't expect the conversation to go this far, for both of them to be so open. It was scary, but at the same time, liberating. For the first time in years, she felt like he could hear her. He doesn't just nod, he doesn't just answer, he hears. Maybe we should start small, she suggested, her voice cautious. Just talk. Not about bills, not about work, about what's inside us, even if it's difficult. Mike nodded, his lips twitching into a faint smile. Okay, he said, I can try. But you know, I'm not a wordsmith. I know, Kate smiled back, and her smile was real, albeit fragile. But you can just listen. That's enough already. They fell silent, but this silence was different, not heavy, not oppressive. It was a silence that had room for both of them. Kate looked at Mike, and for the first time in a long time, she saw not just a husband who leaves and returns, but a man who is also struggling, also lost. I'll go to bed, he said finally, getting up. Tomorrow we need to go to the workshop to check the truck. But maybe we'll sit down in the evening and talk some more. Maybe we need to change something. Kate nodded, feeling her chest become lighter. Okay, she said. I'll be here. He went upstairs and Kate remained on the couch, staring at the dark TV screen. She didn't know what would happen next, didn't know if they could fix what was broken. But this conversation, this small step, was the beginning. They finally heard each other, and it was more than she could have hoped for. The morning at Kate's house was quiet as always. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting soft streaks of light onto the kitchen table scarred by years and neglect. The coffee maker hissed, filling the air with a bitter aroma, and the toaster clicked, throwing out 2 pieces of bread slightly burnt around the edges. Kate stood at the stove, stirring scrambled eggs in a frying pan. She didn't like to cook in the morning, but today she wanted something familiar, almost ritual. Mike was sitting at the table, leafing through the local newspaper that he had brought from the porch. His hair was still damp from the shower, and his t-shirt smelled of fresh laundry detergent. Kate put the scrambled eggs on plates, added some toast, and set everything on the table. She sat down opposite Mike, holding her coffee mug in both hands as if it were an anchor. They didn't speak, but the silence was not heavy, but rather familiar, like an old sweater that you put on without thinking. Since their conversation a few days ago, something had changed, not radically, but enough for Kate to notice. Mike looked into her eyes more often, asked how her day was, even suggested watching a movie together, although in the end they both fell asleep on the couch after half an hour. Are scrambled eggs normal? She asked, watching him cut off a piece of toast. Mike nodded, chewing. Better than the diner next to the highway. Everything there tastes like rubber. Kate chuckled, taking a sip of her coffee. High praise. Maybe I should open a cafe. Only if you serve beer with breakfast. He smiled and his eyes narrowed slightly. It was rare to have such a slight, almost boyish smile, and Kate found herself staring at him longer than necessary. They ate in silence, and Kate listened to the ticking of the clock on the wall, the same one that she hated, but which Mike refused to take off. Her mind wandered. Work, a report due on Wednesday, a conversation with Liz, who was still trying to find out what Kate did that weekend. She didn't think about Jake, or at least she tried not to. That night was like a torn page that she didn't want to reread. But sometimes, in such quiet moments, she caught herself remembering his gaze, his silence, and it frightened her. Not because she was bored, but because it reminded her how far she had come to feel alive. Mike put his fork down and looked at her. His face was serious, and Kate felt her pulse quicken slightly. She knew that look it came when he wanted to say something important, but wasn't sure how. Kate, he began, his voice quieter than usual. Do you still love me? The question hung in the air like smoke, and Kate froze, holding her mug. She didn't expect this, not now, not at breakfast, not after all their conversations. Her throat tightened, and she put the mug down on the table to buy time. Mike looked at her, and in his eyes there was a mixture of hope and fear that she had not seen in years. Kate opened her mouth to respond, but the words stuck. She wanted to say yes because it would be easier, because that was how she should feel. But the truth was more complicated, and after their last conversation, she promised herself to be honest at least with him, at least about this. I. She paused, looking at her hands. The pause dragged on, and she felt the silence getting heavier. I don't know, Mike, but I want to figure it out. Mike nodded, and his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't look angry or hurt, just tired, as if this answer wasn't what he'd hoped for, but also not what he'd feared. Okay, he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. That's fair. Kate looked at him, and her heart sank. I'm not saying that I don't love you, she added quickly, as if afraid that he would misunderstand her. I don't know what this means right now. For me, for us. He nodded again, looking at his plate. I understand, he said, and there was no accusation in his voice. I probably don't know either, but I don't want us to just stop trying. Kate felt her eyes sting and blinked away the tears. I don't want it either, she whispered. That's why I say this. Because, if we're not honest, we'll just drown. Mike looked at her, and his gaze was soft, almost vulnerable. You're right, he said. I'm not a master at talking about such things. But I hear you, Kate, and I want to try, even if it's difficult. She nodded, feeling her chest become lighter, although the tension had not gone away. It was not the end, not the solution, but it was a step small, shaky, but real. They sat in silence, and Kate listened to the coffee maker hissing, the clock ticking, her own breathing becoming more even. We should change the light bulb in the hallway, Mike said suddenly, pushing the plate away. It's blinking again. Kate chuckled, and her lips twitched into a smile. I talked about this a month ago. I know, he shrugged, and there was a slight mockery of himself in his voice. I'm slowing down, but I'll do it today, if I don't leave. Kate looked at him, and her smile grew a little wider. Okay, she said, and maybe we can talk more in the evening, just like that. Agreed, Mike nodded, and his eyes met hers. It was not the same look they had 10 years ago, when they could talk about nonsense for hours, but it was a look that had something alive in it, and that was enough. Kate stood up to put the plates away, and Mike helped her, silently carrying them to sink. They moved side by side, not touching each other, but in this movement there was something that Kate had not felt for a long time, the feeling that they were still a team, albeit a shabby one. Kate sat on the porch, holding a mug of coffee that was already starting to cool. Morning Bloomington was quiet, except for a neighbor's dog barking somewhere in the distance and the wind rustling the leaves. She looked down the street where Mike's truck was parked, his dark silhouette standing out against the morning light. Mike was inside the kitchen, and Kate could hear him rattling dishes as he prepared breakfast. This was unusual. He rarely stayed at home for more than 2 days, but now he had been here for a week. Their conversation at breakfast a few days ago still echoed in her head. Do you still love me? He asked, and her answer, I don't know. But I want to figure it out, hung between them like an unfinished letter. They haven't revisited the issue, but something has changed. Mike began asking more often how her day was, helping with the dishes, even offering to fix the squeaky door in the pantry. Kate noticed these little things, and they awoke in her a faint hope mixed with caution. She didn't want to expect too much, not after all these years, not after their estrangement. The door behind her creaked, and Mike stepped out onto the porch, holding his mug. He sat down next to her on the step, and Kate felt the warmth of his shoulder, although they were not touching each other. He looked tired, but not as tired as after the flight. It was a different kind of tiredness, an internal one, which she had only recently begun to notice. I spoke to the dispatcher, he said, looking down the street. His voice was level, but Kate detected a slight tension in it. I took a vacation. 2 weeks. I'll start on the next one. Kate turned to him, and her eyebrows raised. Seriously? She couldn't hide her surprise. Mike hadn't taken a vacation in years, except for a couple of days at Christmas or when the truck broke down. And, what will you do? He shrugged, taking a sip of his coffee. Don't know. Maybe I'll fix something around the house. Or we'll go somewhere, if you want. Kate felt her chest tighten with unexpected warmth. She didn't expect this, not now, not after everything. Shall we go? She asked, and her voice was softer than she intended. Where? Wherever you say, Mike looked at her, and in his eyes there was a mixture of uncertainty, and something that she had not seen for a long time, the desire to be close. Maybe to the lake, or to Chicago. I don't know, just together. Kate nodded, looking at her mug. Her fingers clenched the ceramic, and she felt a lump forming in her throat. It wasn't a grand promise, it wasn't a romantic gesture, it was Mike trying, and it was more than she could have hoped for. I can take a vacation, she said quietly. I have a couple of weeks saved up. Marge won't be happy, but I can handle it. Mike chuckled, and his lips twitched into a smile. Marge will survive, and Liz will gossip that you ran off with some it guy. Kate laughed, but it came out a little harsher than she intended. The mention of the it guy, even as a joke, stung her, reminding her of Jake, of that night she hadn't told Mike about. She wasn't going to tell, not because she was afraid, but because it didn't make sense. That night was not about love, not about betrayal, but about her own emptiness that she tried to fill. But now, sitting next to Mike, she felt that this emptiness had become smaller, although it had not disappeared. Liz has already created a whole drama, Kate said, trying to keep her voice light. If I take a vacation, she will think that I went to Italy. Italy? Mike raised an eyebrow. What, now I have to learn Italian? Not necessarily, Kate smiled and her shoulders relaxed. But the wine there is good, they say. I can find wine here too, he shrugged, and his smile grew wider. The main thing is that you don't force me to eat anything with chia. Kate laughed, and this time it was genuine. They sat in silence, looking outside, and Kate felt the morning air getting warmer. She didn't know what would happen next. Their vacation could be a step towards reconciliation, or it could show that they had gone too far to return. Divorce was a possibility, as was trying again, or something completely different that she couldn't imagine. But for the first time in a long time, this unknown did not frighten her. She was ready to find out. We should change the light bulb in the hallway, Mike said, finishing his coffee. You're right, it really blinks. Kate nodded, feeling her lips twitch into a smile. I told you so. But if you forget again, I'll change it myself. I won't forget, he looked at her, and there was something warm, almost familiar in his gaze. I promise. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.